Today's lesson, let me say this. I don't consider myself preaching up here. Some of you, oh, it's a good sermon. These are lectures. This is like a seminar. This is a seminary. That's how I want to treat this. Today, I'm going to be a bit preachy. Because these lessons are something that you can really apply to your life. And that's what I intend to do today. So, let's ask God to help me. Father, I just thank you for the privilege of teaching your word. And as we look at the book of Daniel, and particularly this young teenager, Daniel, and the conviction that he had for you, I pray, Lord, that we, under similar circumstances, would be as convicted to live the kind of life that you have called us to live, as was Daniel. So bless the teaching of your word, I pray. Amen. We've all heard the expression, cheaters never prosper. When I was doing my undergraduate studies in Long Beach State College, or University, Long Beach State, it came time for final exams. And there was this one professor who was noted for giving the same final exam every single year. And so there was one student who took the exam the year before, and he ran off copies, corrected copies of the exam, and he was going to sell them for $10 apiece. All of the students who were ready to take the exam this particular year. Now, $10, that was a lot of money back. This was the early 60s. So $10 was worth a lot more than $10 today. Now, many of the students bought the exam. I was tempted. I thought, man, I'm not going to have to study too hard. All I have to do is just learn these answers and I'll pass the course. But then it entered my mind, what if the professor gets wind of what this guy is doing and changes the exam? And that's exactly what he did. And so everybody who bought the exam lost $10. Of them failed the class. Cheaters never prosper. I saw a study from Rutgers University where 45% of students acknowledge that they've cheated on a final exam test. People cheat and get cheated all the time. And the scriptures speak of cheating as a form of dishonesty. For example, a butcher is not to cheat with dishonest scales. A husband or wife are not to cheat on their mate. Employers are not to cheat their employees by withholding wages. Israel was not to cheat God by robbing him of tithes and offerings. So the Christian is like a test. As God is continually evaluating our lives, He does not want us cheating Him in any way. To do so is not the way of gaining the blessings of God. So in our lesson today, we're going to meet 4 young Hebrew teenagers who were all put to a test in Babylon. They passed that test with flying colors while not cheating to do so. So let's kind of get the story in mind. And notice the book of Daniel opens with these words. This is Daniel chapter 1, the first 2 verses. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, that would be Babylon, the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. So these events occurred back in the summer of 605 BC, shortly after General Nebuchadnezzar. Now, I say General Nebuchadnezzar, he was not king at this time, made an invasion into Judah. But before that, he actually conquered Egypt in what is known as the Battle of Carchemish. And that battle took place between the Euphrates and the Orontes River. Now, once Nebuchadnezzar won that battle over Egypt, very important battle in history, it opened up the entire south to Nebuchadnezzar. It opened up Syria. It opened up Israel, all the way down to Egypt. Nebuchadnezzar was not content with having the leading cities of these lands under his control. He also desired the choice young men from the captured nations to relocate in Babylon as prospective government personnel. Among those in Jerusalem then were Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Now we know from extra-biblical historical records that Nebuchadnezzar's wartime activities were cut short when he received the news of his ailing father, I can't say the word here. Nabopolassar. Yeah, that's it. Nabopolassar. He died. Now, he was the king at the time when Nebuchadnezzar made this invasion. But now he's dead. So now Nebuchadnezzar has to leave Judah and he has to go back to Babylon. And he's going to bury his father, and that's when Nebuchadnezzar becomes king. And one of his first acts as official king was to order the chief of his officials to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and the nobles as candidates for his service. As we will see, this summons would lead to a test of the religious convictions of Daniel and his three friends. So that takes in the first three verses of Daniel chapter 1, kind of an introduction to where we're going. Now let's look at verses 4 through 7. And here you see these men now, and we're going to look at Daniel and his three friends, they were put to the test for their convictions. Notice the criteria for selecting the king's servants. The king's chief eunuch was given the responsibility to follow specific criteria for selecting the right Hebrews for training so as to become servants of the king. Now here's the criteria. It's all found in verse 4 of chapter 1. Number 1, their age. They were Hebrew youths, the text says. And that Hebrew word actually refers to teenagers somewhere between 15 and 18 years of age. That's how we know how old Daniel was, approximately how old Daniel was and these three friends when they were taken into Babylonian captivity. They were teenagers. Secondly, their appearance. They were to have no defects. They were to have no mental or physical handicaps. Likewise, they were to be good looking. I mean, these guys had to be handsome. Thirdly, their astuteness. Notice it says, these Hebrew youths had to demonstrate, quote, intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge. They had to be smart. They had to be capable of learning. They had to be intelligent young people. Notice next their ability. These young Hebrews had to have the ability, the text says, of serving in the king's court. Once these young people were chosen, they were given instruction and in the life and ways of the Babylonians. So we see now, here's the criteria. They had to be teenagers, they had to be handsome, they had to be smart, and they had to be willing to work in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. Now notice the courses that are chosen for them by the king. Two basic things. Number 1, they were to receive instruction in literature and language of the Chaldeans. Now, when we talk about the Chaldeans were actually the people who lived in Babylon. They were known as Chaldeans. So you could say Babylonians and Chaldeans were the same, but they were called Chaldeans. Nebuchadnezzar instructed Athanas to put the Hebrew teenagers that he selected as fit to be servants of the king through a rigorous training that would last 3 years and include the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. Notice, these young people spoke only Hebrew. They were brought into captivity. They had to learn the Chaldean language. And all of their courses were going to be taken in the Chaldean language, not the Hebrew tongue. These young people were subjected to a curriculum steeped in Babylonian philosophy, religion, magic, astrology, science, medicine, a few of their classes. However, they had to learn this information in the primary language of the Babylonians. That's the important thing to note here. Notice, secondly, was their indoctrination into a polytheistic religion. One obvious goal of this training was to convert the monotheistic Hebrews to Babylonian polytheism. Remember, these were Jews who were raised in the belief that there's one God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. That's something every Jewish kid would know. It comes from the book of Deuteronomy. They had that memorized. They said that every single day. And Nebuchadnezzar was he was a polytheist. They believed in many, many gods. And so Nebuchadnezzar's goal was to drive the idea of monotheism out of these 4 young men so that they would believe in many, many gods. This involved 2 things. 1, they were required to eat the king's food, and the king appointed for them a daily ration from his choice food and from the wine which he drank. Now, Old Testament scholar Gleason Archer observes that, notice, the meat on the king's menu was taken from animals sacrificed to the patron gods of Babylon, and the wine was part of libation, that is, a drink to these deities. So here they're going to have this big banquet, and the meat that is going to be served was meat that was sacrificed to the gods of the Babylonians. And the wine that they are going to serve, some of that wine had been poured out as a libation. That is, they would pour this wine on the sacrifice. So wherever that wine came from is going to also be served at the table. And God told the Jewish people, I never want you to eat meat. I never want you to drink wine that has been offered to pagan gods. And so you can see that Daniel and his friends are really being put to the test. Secondly, they were renamed after Babylonian deities. Now they're all given new names. Daniel was assigned the name Belshazzar, which means Bel will protect his life. Now, who's Bel? Bel was the chief god of the Babylonians. Bel is also associated with Marduk, and he was also associated with Baal. Now, Baal was a Phoenician god that Jezebel brought from what we would know as the country of Lebanon into Israel at the time in which she was married to King Ahab. And so that's how Baal worship got introduced into Israel. But Baal worship and Bel worship were the same, just different names for the same God. It was the chief God, the principal God. And so you can see Daniel is getting a name that associates with this God, which means he must have been at the top of the class. He's getting the name of the supreme God of the Chaldeans. Notice that Hananiah was assigned the name Shadrach, which refers, notice, to one who worships the moon. Whoa! What religion today has a crescent moon as its symbol? Islam, right? That happens. Here's the story. Worshiping the moon goes back to ancient Babylon. And actually goes way back before the time of Nebuchadnezzar. It goes all the way back to Nimrod. And we've talked about that in the book of Genesis. Nimrod worshiped the sun, but he was encouraging people to worship the creation, the things that were made, because they were gods. I shouldn't use the word creation because they believed that they were gods. So they worshiped the sun, they worshiped the moon, they worshiped the stars, they worshiped the signs of the zodiac. They received messages supposedly from them. So we come now to the 6th. It's on this side of the cross. And you have a man by the name of Muhammad. Muhammad is part of the tribe Quraysh, Quraysh. And Quraysh, the tribe of Quraysh, worshiped the god Hubal, Hubal. Hubal. Hubal was the moon god. Now understand, this worship took place at what was called the Kaaba, in the very heart of the city of Mecca. There were 360 gods that were worshipped by the Arab people at that time. And they all worshipped at the Kaaba. And they would refer to their God as Allah, because that was their God. The word Allah means the God. This is the God of this tribe. Well, the God of the tribe of Quraysh was Hubal. And that was Muhammad's tribe. And he was the moon god. And so there's that day when Muhammad is in a cave and he's meditating. And supposedly Allah sends a message to the angel Gabriel to Muhammad in the cave. Hey, Muhammad, Allah has a message for you. Hubal has a message for you. I don't think he used the term Hubal. But anyway, I'm just helping you. Okay, so here is Muhammad. Here's what you are to know. There's only one God. Not 360 gods. There's only one God. And you, Muhammad, are to be the one who is going to go to the city of Mecca and tell all of the other people who are worshiping false gods, there's only one God. Put away your God and begin to worship Allah, or Hubal, the moon god. Well, you can see that's not going to go over very well with people. They're not going to give up their God. They're not going to just believe whatever Muhammad says. And so, Muhammad was actually driven out of Mecca, went to Medina, got an army together. He had to come back and conquer the city of Mecca in order for the people of Mecca to finally recognize there's only one God, and that is the moon god. And that is the very reason why Islam has the crescent moon as its symbol. It all begins with the worship of Hubal, the moon god. Now, you see that one of the friends of Daniel is named after the moon god in Babylon. Then there's Mishael. He was given the name Meshach, which refers to devotee, the wine god. Azariah was called Abednego, which means servant of Nebo, or the shining one. In other words, he was the god of enlightenment. He was the god of speech. He was the god of writing. He was the god of intelligence, knowledge. So every one of these four young men not only had to learn the Chaldean language, not only had to go through courses for 3 years in the training of the Babylonian culture and religion and philosophy and all that, but there was also the intent of driving monotheism out of their minds so that they would worship the many gods of the Chaldeans. So clearly Daniel and his companions were being forced into a situation that would test their faith and obedience to the God of Israel. Okay, that's the first 7 verses now of chapter 1. With me? Okay. Verses 8 through 21. They passed the test without cheating. Now notice the conviction of Daniel. Verse 8. He resolved not to defile himself. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So Daniel drew a line which he would not cross. And he and his friends were willing to learn the king's language. They were with the literature, the religion, the culture of the Babylonians, but they refused to emulate the king's lifestyle. They were willing to be taught in the textbooks of their great universities, but they were not willing to compromise the law of God when it came to eating the meat of animals that had been sacrificed to pagan deities. So Daniel and his friends refused to eat the king's meat. Not only because it was against God's law, but there was also an old Eastern tradition which said to share a meal is to commit oneself to friendship. In other words, if I sit down next to the king and eat this meat, I'm going against God's law. Also saying, hey, I'm sharing a meal with the king. That means I'm agreeing with what the king represents. And he represents the world. He represents everything that is against God, the God that I serve. I can't do that. So in no way were Daniel and his friends going to establish friendship with pagans and live their kind of lifestyle. I think there's a lesson here for us. You know, we as Christians are called to be holy, right? I'm standing on holy ground. We sang that. Well, not only is the ground holy, we are to be holy. We have hands because we have been purified and justified through the blood of Jesus Christ. We can't associate with the people of the world. We've got to separate ourselves from them. We are called to be holy and to live a life that is so convicting that the people who are out in the world want to live the kind of life that we live. There's a story in a book by R.C. Sproul called The Holiness of God. It's a great book to read. He tells a story about a well-known professional golfer, and he's playing in a tournament with President Gerald Ford, Jack Nicklaus. I don't know who this golfer is because Sproul doesn't mention him by name. I'd like to know, but anyway. After the round was over with, one of the other pros on the tour asked, "Hey, what was it like playing with the president and Billy Graham?" The pro, with disgust, said, "I didn't need Billy Graham stuffing religion down my throat." With that, he headed to the practice tee. His friend followed him, and after the golfer pounded out his fury on a bucket of golf balls, he asked, "Was Billy a little tough on you out there?" The pro sighed and said with embarrassment, "No, he didn't even mention religion." Now here's how Sproul puts this. Astonishingly, Billy Graham had said nothing about God, Jesus, or religion, yet the pro stomped away after the game, accusing Billy of trying to ram religion down his throat. What happened in this encounter? In the presence of this world-famous evangelist, the golfer was reminded of the existence of the holy. Just as importantly, he was convicted of his own unholiness. Isn't that a great story? We need to be living our lives. We need to be holy people, and so holy that we are convicting the unbeliever of their unholiness. That's kind of introspection I want to give us today. I said it's going to be a little preachy today. So I need to look at my own life, and I want you to look at your own life, and I just want you to ask yourself, even as I have to ask myself. I've got neighbors who are wonderful people. They don't believe in God. They don't go to church. They don't even know a thing about the Bible. And I witness to them a little bit here and there because they ask a question. The wife, on the other hand, wants nothing to do with anything I have to say. The husband just tries to be nice. And so Kathy and I have to say, are we living the kind of life that is convicting them? Because they need to know the Lord. And I'm sure you have neighbors like that too, huh? You know people like that too, huh? So first of all, here's Daniel. He resolved not to defile himself. I'm not going to eat this meat. I'm not going to drink the wine. But he respected the authority of the king. Notice verse 8. Once Daniel had made up his decision not to eat the king's meat or drink the king's wine, notice, he sought permission from the commander of the might not defile himself. He not only acted out of conviction, but he did so by showing respect for the authority, even if it was ungodly authority. He didn't go to King Nebuchadnezzar and say, "Hey, I'm not going to eat this meat. I'm not going to drink this wine. You can't shove this meat down my throat. You can't make me drink this." He didn't act that way. He rather went to one of his servants and said, "Hey, we can't defile ourselves. Is there some other plan that we can come up with here that would satisfy the king?" Let me talk a little bit about authority. All authority comes from God. And God has given authority to parents. He's given authority to teachers. He's given authority to police. He's given authority to government. And when we violate any of these authorities, we are violating the authority of God because their authority came from God. Now here's the problem that we find today. We find a lot of children that disrespect their parents and don't obey their parents, huh? And that's because the parents have never instilled the idea that we are the authority, and they let their kids get away with bloody murder. Now, if a child is not going to respect the authority of the parents, they're not going to respect the authority of their teacher. If they're not going to respect the authority of their parents and their teacher, they're not going to respect the authority of the police, nor are they going to respect the authority of the laws of this nation, and ultimately they're going to end up in jail. Teaching authority begins at home. And if parents do not teach their children to respect their authority, they're in trouble. That is, the kids are in trouble, and the parents are in trouble too. They're facing a lot of hellraisers. But let me just give I'm a baseball fan, so I know Ash out there likes baseball too. I'm sure there's some baseball fans. I'm sure you've all heard of Casey Stengel, you know. There's a story about him. And it's told by Chuck Thompson. And Chuck Thompson was the announcer for the New York Yankees back in the 1950s. And he's talking about a situation he had with Casey Stengel in St. Petersburg, Florida, while the Yankees were there on spring training. And so I'm reading what Chuck Thompson writes. One night, some media guys and I were listening to Casey tell stories. The bar closed early in the morning. We all left to go to our rooms, as Thompson is remembering. And as we approached the elevator, the operator was standing there. And back then, elevators weren't run by buttons. I remember that. I'm sure you do too, huh? And he greeted Stengel and 2 or 3 of us who got on. Casey pulled a baseball out of his pocket and told the operator, I got to give this ball to a kid tomorrow. Do me a favor. If any of the guys come in, get them to sign the ball and give it to me at breakfast, will you? And the elevator operator agreed. The next morning, Stengel was, and the elevator man handed him the ball. It had 4 or 5 signatures of Yankee players who had come in late that night. Stengel took the ball, thanked the fellow, and promptly fined all of the players who signed the ball $50 for breaking curfew. Now, this was back in the 50s, and baseball players didn't make a lot of money back in the 50s. I mean, they didn't get million-dollar contracts then. They didn't even make $100,000 back then. But Stengel fined him $50. That was clever. Why? Because Stengel's the authority. And you have to be in bed by a certain time. And you guys weren't. Now, question is, let's just get personal here. How do you respond to authority? How do you respond, for example, when a police officer pulls you over for speeding? Do you say, thank you there, man? You're glad you're doing your... I can remember when I was a kid, I'm driving a bright red 57 Chevy. I'm a teenager. And of course, that red Chevy catches police's attention. I'm driving down a road. I am speeding. And a police officer comes behind me and pulls me over. Now, here's what I said. Oh, you couldn't catch those other guys who were going right by me, huh? Why did you have to pick me out of the crowd? That didn't go over very well. It's like the guy, I heard about this. Here's a guy who stopped at 10 stoplights before he ran a red light. And the police officer pulled him over for running the red light. And he said to the police officer, hey, I stopped at 10 of them. Would I be excused if I ran just one? That's the way people think about their religion today. If I do 10 good deeds and 1 bad deed, I'm on good sides with God, right? Or, I stopped golfing. I used to golf as a younger person, but I love the camaraderie. I love the beauty of the golf course. But I came to a point, I wasn't a good golfer. I came to a point where I realized I'm spending a lot of money to get frustrated. Invite me to golf, okay? I'll go to the golf club and have dinner with you, but I won't go out on the course, okay? And yet, some of you are golfers here. Do you follow the rules? Or do you cheat by misrepresenting the number of strokes it took to put the ball in the hole? You know, about here at church, you know, the responsibility of the pastors and the elders of this church, Hebrews says, is to keep watch over your souls as those who give an account. Christ is the ultimate authority of the church, but within the local church there are pastors and there are elders, and they have authority over us because responsibility that the rest of us do not have, because they're going to have to answer to God as to how they operated the church. Were they watching out for the souls of the people who are here? Or are we going to rebel against we don't like what's going on? There's authority, and we have a responsibility of obeying that authority. Next, he requested a 10-day test. So, here's Daniel now. He resolved not to defile himself. He respected the authority of the king. He didn't just go to the king, I'm not going to eat the meat, I'm not going to drink the wine. No, he respected the authority. Thirdly, he requested a 10-day test. He says, please test your servants for 10 days and let us be given vegetables and water to drink. Now that sounds like what my wife would order at a restaurant, or what she wants me to have for lunch every day, vegetables and water. Yeah? Yuck. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence, and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. Now that Hebrew word for a vegetable can also include grain. So what Daniel is saying is, hey, we want to be veg for 10 days. We only want vegetables, we only want grain, we only want water to drink, we don't want your meat, we don't want your wine. And we want to be put on a 10-day test, and we'll see at the end of 10 days who is best qualified. Those of us who obeyed God, or those others who did what you as the king want, and eat your meat and drink your wine. So notice what Daniel is asking for a test to show whether his diet or the king's diet is healthiest, but the king has also put Daniel to a test. Remember, these are 4 teenagers away from home in a strange land. They're being offered the best the king has to give. They're being offered choice food, excellent wine, a chance to live it up. It's been said, the test of real character is what you do when no one else is watching. I have a problem with Dennis Prager at this point. I've heard him say that, he's the conservative Jewish talk show host, Dennis Prager. I've heard him say, what you do in private is nobody's business. So if you want to use God's name in private, that's okay. Probably if you want to watch pornography in private, that's okay. It's what you do publicly that becomes important. That's what determines. No! What you do in private when no one else is watching really reveals your character. And here are these 4 young men away from home, away from the voice of their mother, away from the authority of their father, away from all of their other friends. I really think most teenagers would like that situation. And I can just imagine when hey, let's go out and get drunk, man. Let's have a good time. Let's party it up. But if people are going to have a clear mind and be prepared for the challenges of life, they would stay away from strong drink. I'll tell you a man who did a lot of drinking was Solomon. And he came to a point in his life where he says this, wine is a mocker, strong drink a brawler, and whoever is intoxicated by it is not wise. So what I did is a little research here. I wanted to know how many armies have been defeated because the general or somebody got drunk. Well, we're going to see when we get to the 5th chapter of Daniel, for example, Belshazzar, Babylon's last king, lost his empire to the Medes and Persians when there was this drunken orgy that took place in the palace. Alexander the Great, who conquered the civilized world, died years of age in a drunken debauchery. When the Iron Duke of England, Wellington, was marching his army across the Iberian Peninsula, word was brought to his headquarters. There was a store ahead of them selling Spanish wine. And so what did Wellington do? He sent some men ahead, blew up the bar so that none of his soldiers could get any of the wine. Because he knew if they drank the wine, they wouldn't be prepared to fight. Napoleon Bonaparte lost the Battle of Waterloo to Wellington because the night before, Marshal Ney, one of his generals, tarried too long over a glass of wine, and the next morning his head was and his mind too unsteady. When France fell in World War II against Hitler, Marshal Pétain said France was defeated because its army was drunk. Yes, when getting drunk is such a socially acceptable thing to do, Daniel and his men knew if they were going to be the best that the king had, it meant doing things God's way and not the king's way. I think they were very wise teenagers. Don't you? Well, notice now when we get to verses 14 through 21, we see the comparison with us. And now the 10 days are... And so Daniel and his friends, they've had the vegetables and water for 10 days. Ugh, I can't imagine this. They got on this vegetarian diet while all of the rest who are being tried out, they had the king's meat and they had the king's wine. I mean, they were living it up. So now we're going to have the comparison. Verses 14 through 60. The request was granted. The overseer of the king continued to withhold their choice food and wine and kept giving them vegetables. Okay, we'll go through this test for 10 days. Notice the respect was earned, beginning at verse 17. As for these youth, God gave them knowledge and intelligence and every virtue and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. Then at the end of the days, which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king spoke with them, and out of them all, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And they entered the king's personal service. As for every matter of wisdom and understanding about the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all of the magicians and conjurers who were all in his realm. And Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. So notice the test. Not one was found like the 4 teenagers. I mean, they were at the top of the class. They were 10 times better. 10 days they were going to eat vegetables and water. So at the end, they were 10 times superior to those who ate the king's meat and drank the king's wine. This even, by the way, included the wise men of Babylon. So now here's the question I want to come up with and bringing this to a close. What was the reason these young men stood the test? What was it about these men that made them superior to others, that made them willing to obey God rather than men? I want to suggest 2 principles. And I know that most of you have already raised your kids, but you got grandkids. If you could take what I'm sharing with you and share it with other members of the family, you'll be doing yourself and them a good favor. Because I'm going to share the 2 principles that saved Daniel and his friends. Number 1, when you have convictions for what is right, you can resist worldly pleasures. You never have to cheat. Daniel and his friends could stand up for what was right because they were properly taught what was right, and they were committed to do what was right. Now, where did they get their training? Most likely from godly parents. The responsibility of parenting is to instill values in their children. Listen, children are not born with a blank slate. They are born with a bent toward evil. The most natural thing for a child to do is resist authority and do the opposite of what they are told. Ever notice that? Parents must first demand respect by forcing the child through discipline what they are told and to teach them right from wrong and good from evil. I was so happy. I got my grandkids here, 2 of my grandkids here this morning, sitting back there with Kathy. The conversation on the way in to church this morning was all of the gay and transgender stuff that they see on television today on their programs. It's being shoved down their throat, and they know it's wrong. Netflix has a what was the program? What was the program? And agree. It's all turned into a gay. Everybody on there is gay. That's the society we live in today. And I'm glad I've got grandkids that know what's right and what's wrong. The problem with many parents is they were never taught the sinful nature of the child they brought into the world. Rather, they see their child as cute and pure, not as someone who will become selfish. And then when the child is about 2 years of age, they suddenly wonder, what has happened? The 2-year-old is already seeking independence from their parents. And if they don't get what they want, they scream bloody murder. They lie and they blame others as their attempt to stay out of trouble. They sass those who deny them what they want. Huh? Starts about 2. And the parents aren't prepared. No parent teaches their child to lie, to steal, or sass others. They do it naturally. The psalmist wrote this, the wicked are astray. They go astray as soon as they are born, speaking lies. Did you hear that? Children are born with a bent to tell lies. Their poison is like the poison of a serpent. They are like a deaf cobra that stops its ears, which will not heed the voice of charmers, charming ever so skillfully. Have you ever seen a child, you're telling the child to do something, and the child covers up his ears? Yeah. I'm not listening to you. I'm not listening to you, Dad. No. I don't hear a word you're saying out there. When you find covering up his ears, it means he's refusing to listen, and that is the root behind the word rebellion. The child is rebelling against the parent. That's all right. We'll get this closed down. Solomon wrote this, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from them. Now, this word rod, it could bother us. Because we could think of a steel bar or something. Don't want to hit a kid with a steel bar. The word rod, actually from the Hebrew, refers to a branch from a tree, a switch. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and the switch, a branch from a tree, will remove it from him. But it needs to be properly applied, and the Bible tells you exactly where to apply it. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 13, which I didn't put in your notes, says this, the rod or the switch is for the back of him who lacks understanding. And the word that is translated back in the Hebrew means middle of the back. Now you take a little child and you turn that child around and to the back and you'll find a well-cushioned area to apply the blows of the shillelagh. It's called a buttocks. Pardon? Proverbs 10:13. Now, this is considered child abuse today. Why do you think we have such violence? Why do you think we have such rebellion going on amongst many of our teenagers today? It's because they've never been properly disciplined at home. They've never respected the authority of their parents. And their parents are so ignorant how to raise the kids in the first place. The character of a child is molded very early in life. If a parent cannot control a child at 2 or 3 years of age, listen, the parent will not be able to control the child when that child is 12 or 13. When parents understand the sinful nature of their children and by observation seek to drive out their evil bents while encouraging their good bents, then as they get older, they will more likely become respectable or respectful, godly children. Solomon said this, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Now, this verse is so misunderstood. There's 2 words I want to hear from the Hebrew. The word that is translated way and the word that is translated old. Train up a child in the way he should go. We're not talking about a path in the road, a way to go as you're traveling. It is a word that means a bent in the child. There is a bent in the child. And it's the responsibility of the parent through observation to observe the bents in the child. There's evil bents and there's good bents. And as the child gets a little older, you begin to see, hey, this child is artistic, this child is athletic, this child is coordinated, this child is intelligent, this child is musical. And what you need to do, go with those bents, encourage them. But you'll also notice the child lies, the child steals, the child is rebellious, there's evil bents. And the responsibility of parenting is to encourage the good bents and drive out the evil bents, the bad bents, the sinful bents by discipline. Then when he's old, now that word old is an unfortunate translation. It doesn't mean when that child grows up and he's finally 60 or 70 years of age and now he's finally doing the will of his dead parents. The word old is actually the word for an adolescent. Maybe older would be when he is older. He will not depart from it. So, when you become a teenager, if you have been properly raised, what this proverb is saying is you have a good chance of that child turning out pretty good. And we must understand something. The book of Proverbs is not a book of promises. Okay? Let me say that again. The book of Proverbs is not a book of promises. It is a book of wisdom. And what the book of Proverbs is teaching, and specifically in this passage, is there's no guarantee that if you do the right thing, your child is going to turn out all right. But if you do the right thing, that is the wisest thing to do to help that child turn out all right. Am I making sense here? I need an amen or something, you know? Okay. Okay. Parenting begins the first day a child is brought into the world. Solomon said, "It is by his deeds that a lad distinguishes himself if his conduct is pure and right." Let me tell a little bit about my raising as a kid. Very committed Christian dad who taught me right from wrong very early in life. And we lived in this little home in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, and I'm about 5 years of age. We didn't have TV. I don't even know if TV was much around in those days. We're going back to the 40s. But we had a radio, and I enjoyed listening to the radio. I even enjoyed listening to the news as a kid. How many of you remember Gabriel Heater? Oh, that make a few hands. Yeah, I used to listen to Gabriel Heater in the news every night. But I would also listen to Gangbusters and The Shadow Knows and Fibber McGee and Molly and all of those shows. Now, they had commercials. And some of those commercials were commercials and beer commercials, and my dad would always get up. As soon as he heard Lucky Strike means fight, he'd turn the radio down. Dad, I'm listening to the show. Hey, just a minute, son. When the commercial is over with, I'll turn the radio back on and you can finish listening to it. That's how my dad raised me. I don't want you drinking, son. I don't want you smoking, son. I don't want you hearing this kind of stuff. When I was in high school, this served me pretty well. I love baseball, and so I used to go to the old Los Angeles Angel baseball games. I would drive down there. Old Wrigley Field, South Central Los Angeles. They weren't the Los Angeles Angels of today. The Dodgers weren't even in town. So it was the Pacific Coast League Angels. And I have two friends in the back seat of my red 57 Chevy. And I'm driving down Washington Boulevard in Los Angeles. And both of them light up a cigarette. And I say, would you please put out the cigarette? And they start laughing at me. No, we're not going to do that. So I stopped the car. I turned the car around. And they said, where are you going? I said, we're going home. You mean we're not going to the game? No, we're going home. You put out the cigarette and we'll go to the game. Otherwise, we're going home. You're not smoking in my car. They put out the cigarette. And we went to the game. Never had another problem. Parents who raise their children by example and by the principles of God's Word stand a far better chance of raising godly children of good character than those who don't. And I have little doubt that Daniel and his three friends were raised by godly parents who understood human nature and instilled with them the kind of character it takes to resist the pressures of the world and the tantalizing offers of a king. So, the first thing I think, you have to raise your kids to have conviction for what is wrong so they will resist worldly pleasure. This involves discipline. Secondly, when you honor God with your lifestyle, you will yield God-given rewards. That's something we need to teach our kids. And that's exactly what happened to Daniel and his three friends, remember? They got rewarded because they did what God wanted them to do. They got promoted. They were the top of the class. I read the story of a young boy who in many ways reminds me of Daniel. An older man shared Jesus with this boy, and he accepted Jesus as his Lord and Savior. The man also had him make a vow that he would never drink alcohol. When the lad grew up, he was then entrusted to take a message to the States, who at that time was John Quincy Adams. When the young lad came to Washington, D.C., the president welcomed him to a banquet where he would dine with some of the world's leaders. He was given a seat of honor next to the president. Before each of them was a glass of wine. The president lifted the glass of wine to drink while the young man fidgeted and blushed, not knowing quite what to do. Finally, he spoke. Mr. President, I've taken a vow never to drink. The president put down his glass and gave instructions for all who were present. No wine will be drunk at this table tonight. And every man away. In the days to come, the Congress of the United States heard about it, the press wrote about it, the whole world heard about it, and in the years that followed, no finer representative ever came out of the state of Massachusetts than Henry Wilson, who was elected Vice President of the United States under Ulysses S. Grant. Now understand something. I'm not saying it's wrong to have some champagne, some wine, or a glass of beer. I'm not talking about abstinence here. I'm talking about living a holy life that is going to set a proper example to those who do not know the Lord. Listen, Jesus drank wine. Not the same wine you have today. I have a recipe for the kind of wine that Jesus would have drank back in the... It was watered down. I mean, you could get drunk off that wine, but you had to drink a lot more of it. Jesus not only drank wine at the wedding feast, but he drank wine at the Passover meal. They served wine, not grape juice, like we had this morning. I can remember doing a sermon on what would Jesus drink. That was the title of it. I was doing a series on the life of Jesus in a kind of a practical way. So, what would Jesus drink? That was my sermon. And I said he would drink wine. He did at the Cana of Galilee, did at the Passover, and so forth. I'll tell you, when that sermon was over with, I had an elder who came up to me who was very, very opposed to drinking. And he got in my face. I am so glad I didn't invite someone to come and hear this sermon today. I would have been embarrassed. Jesus never drank wine. He drank grape juice. He turned, at the wedding of Galilee, water into grape juice. There are people who think that way. No, he didn't drink wine. So, I'm not saying, hey, just be a teetotaler. I don't drink much. I don't drink beer. I have a little bit of wine once in a while. The issue is intoxication. That's the issue. So, here's what I want to leave you with. Just think about Daniel and the raising that he had from his parents and how they taught him to do what was right and what was wrong. And how Daniel, at a time when he could be so tempted, did what was right. He said, I want to be a holy person. I want to do what God wants me to do, even if it is a gang wants me to do. I am going to live a holy life. I want all of us to live a holy life. I want all of us to take this message and make a personal introspection here. Are you really living the kind of life that is convicting your neighbor? Where your neighbor actually feels a bit uncomfortable because he realizes how unholy he is. That's the preacher in me today. That's the message I want to convey. Now, remember, what are we going to talk about next week? We're going to talk about Iran. We're going to talk about everything in the Bible that Iran, from the book of Genesis to the book of Ezekiel. And we're going to tell you exactly what is going on and how close we are to the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Hallelujah. Come back next week and invite someone to come.